Dang, I wish I could split myself into 3. It would really help with the amount of work that I put myself through. Hello interwebs, it is time, and we will be talking a lot about time, for us to talk about the final episode of Doctor Who Flux, The Vanquishers. This episode, as with most episodes of Doctor Who Flux this year, or this season, you know what I mean. As with most episodes, there was quite a lot going on, and as a finale for this series and this sort of serialized story, I feel like it was a little bit lackluster in its own terms and sort of wrapping up all these big events that are going on, and I have a lot of problems with some things here and there, but also regardless of that, kind of on its own terms, I also enjoyed this episode. So this is going to be a little bit of a weird one to talk about because I'm frustrated in a lot of aspects with it, but also like certain elements of it that really have nothing to do with the whole ongoing storyline stuff. So it's going to be a complicated review to get into in just a second. But before we get to my spoiler-filled discussion, the BBC, which produces and makes this season of Doctor Who, is currently embroiled in a controversy surrounding an article that they posted that was incredibly transphobic, did not meet their own journalistic standards, and had a ton of misinformation and vilified the transgender community, as well as platforming a woman named Lily Cade, who literally called for the genocide of the trans community. It was absolutely horrible and terrible, and I have linked down below, if you have not heard about this event, a video that I did and 2 videos by YouTuber Sean that outlines all the issues and ongoing problems with the BBC and this article. And while the BBC did remove Lily Cade from the article, they still have not apologized for platforming her, as well as denouncing her horrific tirade, as well as leaving the article itself up, which still is filled with its misinformation. So I'm just mentioning that whenever I talk about any BBC related reviews, even if, and this is the case with Doctor Who, the people making the show are actually trans supportive and trans affirming. So just want to make that clear. Go check out those videos if you haven't heard about that event, but I just wanted to put that disclaimer on anything that I talk about BBC with. That being said, let's have some fun, talk about the episode. So I'm going to be honest with you, it's going to be kind of hard to talk about this one because there's just so much going on with it, and I'm just going to kind of cherry pick. I usually try to do like a recap of every single event in an episode and kind of linearly go through, but I think that that's going to be almost an impossibility. So I'm just going to talk a little about little bits and pieces in this episode that I just want to talk about. So the opening of this episode has the Doctor escaping that really weak cliffhanger that we had last week, where the time guy was going to touch her and oh no, he's going to tear her apart. Of course, we know that that wasn't going to happen. She gets away pretty quickly, but then we have her talking to the Ood character, who I love seeing the Ood getting some prominence in this episode, and she tries to escape, but she gets split into 3 different versions of herself, so it costs 3 different elements of time, which is really cool to see. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the, whatever the Series 4 finale was back in Russell T Davies' eras, where we had Donna Noble and the 2 other David Tennant Doctors. Kind of had that element to it, and it was kind of a lot of fun to sort of see that, and I loved that idea of her being split across 3 different time zones. Now, obviously, it was just kind of a wibbly wobbly timey-wimey way to explain why the Doctor would be able to be involved in the 3 disparate storylines that have been going on, so it was a little bit of an easy out, but I think it was kind of fun how they kind of came together and worked together to weave into each other's stories. A little bit forced and contrived, but I enjoyed it in and of itself. With our first story, we have the Doctor on this station with our 2 time people, the villains of this entire series so far, and I have to say this was ultimately the part of this episode that I was most frustrated with. This entire Flux season has been building up these Ravager guys as the big bads, the ones trying to destroy everything, and we ultimately learn their plan here, that they plan to take over the station and use the Flux to destroy all of space so that time can reign eternal, and they're sort of sacrificing to their god time, and they wish to just rewind and redo the Flux event over and over and over again to torture everyone in the same way that they wish to torture the Doctor. Describing all of that, it feels so big and grand and very heady, and as a result, it felt meaningless. It felt weightless. I couldn't connect with any of this. It just felt like, okay, the galaxy is gonna end. Like, you know that that's not gonna be the case. And so these people just monologuing at the Doctor and being like, ooh, we're gonna torture you. Ooh, we're gonna erase your memories, because they have her watch and they're gonna destroy that weird castle, which was a really great image, the like haunted house thing. I like this idea of them being torturous and like wanting to relish in the pain of everything, but other than that, there was just no hook in here that felt like I could really like feel the stakes of it in any personal way, because you ultimately know nothing's going to get destroyed. So it's just these people monologuing, and it just proved to me that their entire storyline this season just felt superfluous and dumb. They were added villains that I was hopeful for, because I did like their scenery chewing and their look at the beginning of the season, but ultimately they just felt superfluous and were just kind of there and annoying, and ultimately I had no real care about them at all. However, that being said, the storyline that I did really enjoy this episode was the Sontarans plan, because we ultimately, this is sort of getting in further in the episode, we ultimately learned that the Sontarans were planning this great big idea of unifying with the Cybermen and the Daleks to try and mutually assure that they would survive the Flux event, but the Sontarans planning on just betraying them at just the last moment and shoving them into the Flux to hopefully stop the Flux from destroying all life in the galaxy, which fits the Sontarans in such a clever way. I have not watched a lot of the old Doctor Who series, and so the Sontarans have always felt kind of jokey in this era of Doctor Who, and I love them. Like, I love Drax, he's wonderful, but I've never felt them as a threat, and this ultimately made them feel like a big threat. And it's funny that the small, quote-unquote smaller scale version of the threat of the week, with the Sontarans taking over and Earth and everywhere else, felt more impactful than the Flux and the Time people did, and it just shows how, like, lower, not that the Sontarans were that low of a stakes, they were still big stakes, but like tying it into something smaller than the galaxy's ending can make it feel a little bit more worthwhile and actually personify your villains in a much more interesting way. And I thought that I thought that they were a lot of fun, and all the stuff that the Doctor was working with Yaz and everyone to trick them and betray them, like convincing them to allow Jericho and returning Miss Brown in this episode to go to Sontaran Command was a lot of fun, like tricking them with the chocolate bit. And just all the humor with the Sontarans this episode was great. It's like, croutons, we'll destroy you. You must be destroyed. I think that all of that was just a lot of fun, and I deeply enjoyed it. And just goes to show how ultimately I really feel like the ongoing storyline of the Flux was just meaningless in a lot of senses here. What I also did enjoy with this Sontaran storyline is it allowed every character that we've introduced this season to kind of have a little bit to do. Obviously, we have Miss Brown and Jericho working with the Sontarans to try to get into their command and trick them into getting into the right place at the right time to send them into the Flux. We also have the Liverpool Tunnel guy finally getting some relevance here, and I liked that he was sort of given some justification. I love the Doctor sort of saying like, this you did good job. We figured out that you were like building worlds around the Flux and trying to protect people, and this was really important and helpful, and it was nice to see all these storylines kind of weave together. Ultimately, none of them felt super impactful because I think there was too many of them, but I did kind of enjoy them. And I think one storyline that kind of felt a little bit flat to me was Vinder and Diane inside the prisoner. I liked the idea of Vinder and Diane trying to escape the prisoner and eventually just getting out and having enough time to send a message to the Doctor to come and have her rescue them, but it just feels weird to me that like Diane's the only one there. Why would Diane be the only one to survive? It just felt convenient. And so that just kind of threw me the entire time that those two would be, of all the people in the universe, the ones to survive inside Prisoner. Maybe they were keeping her alive because of doing something with Dan, but ultimately just kind of felt silly and convenient in a lot of senses. Another element of all of this was the Grand Serpent, who, after last week, where I felt like he was kind of properly villainous, trying to take over all of UNIT, he's kind of wasted here again. I feel like he was a character who could have been like this conniving guy, and we sort of see that he's the one behind the master plan with the Sontarans here, but we never really feel that in any real way. He's just kind of there being like, I deserve credit, and torturing the Doctor, which made him, he was a little bit better person to torture the Doctor than the Sontarans, but he ultimately just kind of gets sidelined and goes and gets confronted by Vinder and Kate, which was nice to see them kind of get a moment, but Kate also felt kind of superfluous this episode. She just kind of shows up to say that UNIT's back around now, and it didn't really have a lot of weight because I feel Vinder's vindication of putting the Grand Serpent into exile was much more impactful. It still feels not as strong as it could have been, but I did like that the Grand Serpent didn't recognize Vinder and didn't know who he was, because he was like, oh, for me that was like a any other day sort of thing. And so I thought that was cool, but ultimately still feels a little bit weightless. However, I did enjoy Belle and Vinder's reunion. It was kind of a little bit let down by the fact that we've never seen these characters together, so getting to see them back together, quote unquote, didn't really impact as much, but the actors sold it as well as they could, and I liked that quite a bit. I also felt impactful when Jericho died as well. I thought that was deeply sad, and it was sad to see him go, because Jericho is one of the few people added in the season, besides I think Dan, that really felt like a strong presence on the show, even in his few moments. But this brings me to a negative that I have here, because I really, really disliked that the Doctor's plan was to double down on the Sontarans' plan, because the Sontarans just wanted to shove the Daleks and Cybermen into the Flux to stop the Flux, but her idea was to also shove the Sontarans in there. And the Doctor's someone who is much more compassionate than that. She works to try to save everyone she can. Yes, she may have a little bit of a thing against the Daleks and maybe even the Cybermen, but I feel like she wouldn't just like willy-nilly like, we're just going to toss all the Sontarans, like even a few episodes ago this season, right? She was upset when the British commander killed the Sontarans and he didn't need to. So even just like within this own season, it kind of feels betraying of the Doctor's character that she would just be like, screw it, we're going to send the Sontarans in there as well. And also, does this mean that all Cybermen and Daleks and Sontarans are gone now? It just feels a little bit weird and like, doesn't mean, okay, so they're all gone and dead, I guess, but maybe not, probably not, given that, like, Flux is reset or whatever. And then also Prisoner, containing it, also felt a little bit convenient. It's just all felt like a little bit bloodlusty for the Doctor and against her characterization and a little bit too easy of a moment. However, I did like Carvanista revealing that he was part of the division with Doctor and he actually can't speak about it, showing us finally a little bit more of the weight of the Doctor's time in division. That was one of my big problems last episode and continuing into this one, where division, this thing that we're supposed to fear, supposed to have had all this influence, and we really have never seen that outside of one episode last season. And so I liked seeing a little bit of the impact here. And finally also paying off that storyline from the opening of the season where Yaz and the Doctor were after Carvanista. And I also like at the end of the episode, Yaz, the Doctor opening up to Yaz and saying, I should have let you in. Kind of opening up finally Yaz and the Doctor was something I was hoping to see more of this entire season, but not really getting to see. And so, it's one of those sad things because like I was really hoping this whole season would explore the Doctor and Yaz's relationship more, and we didn't really get a lot of that. And I would be sitting here being like, well, hopefully in the next season, but ultimately Chibnall's proved to me that that's not really ever going to be the case, and we only have 3 more episodes with this version of the Doctor and presumably Yaz as well, so I'm not holding my breath on that front. But I did like also that Dan got to go traveling with the Doctor because he was a welcome presence this season. I was a little bit frustrated that Diane was a little bit like, oh, you didn't come in time. I'm like, I'm sorry, girl, the universe was ending, Dan was dealing with stuff, he was stuck back in time, have a little bit of compassion. I understand her having PTSD, but it just felt a little cold for her just to be like, you didn't get to me in time, sort of thing, where it would be different. It was like, you reminded me of a trauma, but it was more just like, screw you, you didn't get to me in time. I'm like, girl, he was trying his best, all right? He was trying his best, so that just kind of frustrated me. And then this brings us to the end of the episode for the most part, where we have the 2 Time Ravagers bringing the Doctor back to Atribos to sacrifice to Time, who just looks... I was really hoping that the Time guy would look like something interesting, but it's just another Ravager, I guess, just using his image sort of thing. And I just was like, okay, so this Time Lord, I guess not really a Time Lord, but this God of Time, he's just going to be like, yeah, I'm going to kill these guys because you didn't do it well enough. The Doctor stopped you. I could kill the Doctor, but I'm not going to because I'm going to leave you a vague hint of some other thing that you're going to deal with in the next 3 episodes, and vaguely hinting that the Master is going to be coming back in some way, shape, or form as well, and sort of probably building out either to the last 3 episodes of Jodie's time or to the 60th Doctor special that Russell T Davies is going to take over. And so I'm just like, okay, just pass the buck down the road on that, which was frustrating to say the least, and also kind of pointed out this problem, which was like the villains of this series, like the Ravagers, had so many opportunities to kill the Doctor. The Vision had opportunities to kill the Doctor, just shoot her and just be done with it, or blow her up or whatever. They had so many times, but just the bloodlust and revenge that they wanted to get just prevented them, and I was just like, if only people would just kill them. Kill the Doctor, and it would make you have so many ample opportunities. It's just the constant villain mistake getting made, so they can monologue for a long time. And even the Lord of all time does this as well. And so I was just frustrated by that. So sorry to end on a negative, and I know I kind of bounced around in my review here a bunch, but ultimately at the end of the day, I found this to be a mess that does tie together everything in a way that's a little bit neater than I thought this show was going to do, and I did find some enjoyment in areas that I did not expect, namely the Sontaran invasion again, which I really just makes me feel like this whole season should have just been the Sontarans as the main villain and really honed in on that idea and condensed it, and I think I probably would have had a lot more fun with that. So I did enjoy all of that stuff, and I enjoyed some of the character moments spread out throughout the episode, but ultimately found the entirety of this thing, how the Flux finished out and tied together, to feel a bit weightless, despite the fact that it's ending all time in the universe. So certainly I don't want to make it seem like this entire season was not worthwhile. I do think that there was some fun stuff in here, mainly some character moments, the Sontarans, the Angel stuff as well. I think all of that was a lot of fun this season. But if I look at what this season was trying to do with the Flux, with the ongoing storyline, with all these disparate characters, I have to sit back and look at it and say, yeah, it was ultimately a bit disappointing. And I didn't feel like it needed to be this big grand thing because it ultimately didn't pay it off. And the ongoing storylines, like the Timeless Child and the Division stuff that it was trying to answer, just felt like it was getting in the way of the more interesting stuff and was mostly just telling us instead of actually showing us the weight of these things and just being like, let's just tell you exposition and not making me feel it. And so all the extra stuff, all the serialized ongoing stuff did not work for me. It was individual episodes that worked for me, which surprised me because that was what I was really hoping the season was going to be able to do. Tell a serialized story and make a serialized story in modern Doctor Who work at an effective level and play to Chris Chibnall's strengths. And ultimately, it didn't. It really didn't. And just proved to me that Doctor Who, I think, at least in some senses, works better in a more individualized format. I'm not saying serialized stories can't work. In fact, I would like to see that be tried again at some point, but I don't think that this season really proved it. And ultimately just reinforced what I think works best on Doctor Who, more episodic storylines. So that's my ultimate thought on Doctor Who Flux and this episode in particular, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in general. I'd like to hear comments down below. And beyond all of that, thank you so much for joining me, and I will look forward to seeing you all for my Wheel of Time review going out tomorrow, or the Doctor Who New Year special that'll be coming in just a few weeks, and I'll be reviewing that as well. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.